Hello, we are transmitting to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century. Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost. Whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you. This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 438.LU2319, certificate number 41799. Exiled to Sentosa.
So pack your bags, prepare for adventure, and get ready to make memories that will last a lifetime on Sentosa Island.
Welcome to the show, Nathan Jennings. Thank you for joining us here on the Omnibus Project.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You seem vaguely familiar, like I've met you many times before. Are you local to the region?
Depends on how big you're defining the region. I live in the Intermountain West, which isn't technically the same region you're in, but yeah, I live in. I'm contacting you today from Lehi, Utah.
Oh, from Lehi, Utah. I have a doctor of nursing there who is currently prescribing me some medication. Not from Lehi, he's from Provo, but you know, the Intermountain West, as you like to say.
Sure.
How's the weather out there? Is it sunny and clear and crisp and cold today?
It is, as one might predict for a Utah autumn.
Yeah. As I'm picturing you where you are, well, those are the four words that came to mind, and I can't think of a fifth word. I guess windy.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
We're in a valley here. It's a bit of a nature's wind tunnel.
And Nathan, what is your line of work? Can you describe your not just your area of expertise, which we're going to get to in a moment, but like what is your sphere?
Well, I'm hesitant to say because I heard on a recent episode you and Ken were complaining about a lot of the guest hosts being boring middle-aged white attorneys.
That's right.
I don't want to be another one of those, but you know.
But are you?
I'm another one of those. Yeah.
Boring middle-aged white attorney.
Yeah.
Would you be surprised if I told you that so far in Omnibus 2.0, the number of people I've talked to, and we've recorded now 10 episodes as you and I are talking, the number of people I've talked to who are not attorneys is a small enough number that it's notable how few people have been on the show who aren't attorneys.
Oh, wow.
I didn't realize that we had such a broad listenership in the attorney class. Every kind of attorney.
Well, if it helps, I'm not much of an attorney.
What is your branch of attorneyship-dom?
Technology, in-house, corporate legal, expertise in cloud software. I work for one of the bigger tech companies, but I like to think it's one of the less evil ones.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that what everyone who works at a tech company wants to think about their tech company?
Yeah, but most of them are working for the evil ones.
Right. So how do you know from inside? It's like, how can a depressed person tell that they're depressed? Because from within being a depressed person, you seem like a reasonable person.
I think if you stand in a line of depressed people, you get a good baseline of how depressed you are compared to everyone else. And I'm constantly looking at how evil the other big tech companies are, and I'm like, well, we're not that bad.
I see. So less evil is sort of where that's where you're planting your flag.
For
okay.
sure.
Less
sure.
evil.
Not evil.
Good. Well, I think is there any way? I feel like you yourself have been entered into the omnibus enough times now that there are people who probably have a more exhaustive knowledge of the canon than I do, who might be able to identify you through sort of various, I don't know, clues as someone who they already are familiar with, or someone who has already kind of been entered into the platinum discs. Can you think of specific examples where you might appear to futurelings already, like our sentient overlords?
I'm not too worried that there's enough information about me in the record to dox me, although the futurelings wouldn't be able to do that. I'm long dead to them. Right. But Ken gets things wrong about me a lot, and so, I mean, you could probably do a whole, if I wanted to, I could guest host an addenda episode about all of the stories Ken told about me that I have different versions of.
Yeah. I mean, you were raised nominally in the same household. Do you think he was aware of you a lot of the time?
Oh yeah,
when you were kids.
I made my presence known, but I think he begrudgingly acknowledged my existence, I would say.
Yeah, that's his relationship with me.
I was standing in his shadow a lot, so my parents had trouble seeing me, but he knew I was there.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like so tall.
No.
Yeah, he knew you were there. That's right. You were at night short sheeting his bed. You were putting extra salt in his Croco Krispies.
Yeah, I mean, we shared a bunk bed. Living overseas in smaller apartments, we didn't get our own bedrooms until we were well into our teens. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time in close quarters.
And you and I have met in person.
Mm-hmm.
And what were how many of those instances have there been, and what are your recollections of those encounters?
It's been a while.
Yes.
I think the last time we saw each other was probably at a Mariners game.
That's right.
When an acquaintance of mine, a friend of yours, was throwing out the first pitch, and we were there with a big group to cheer her on. I'm not sure I've seen you since then.
Yeah, that was a while back.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I haven't been up to Seattle that much in recent years. I was supposed to come up for the big party, the new Coke episode,
yeah. And
but
what happened?
I had a prior engagement that I was not able to make it up for, but I did listen to it, and it sounded amazing. I wish I'd been there.
When you say prior engagement, do you mean something to do with your less than evil tech company, or do you mean that it was a wedding that you had on your calendar for 9 months? I mean, prior engagement.
It was a work adjacent obligation, I would say.
Yeah, that's just exactly as cryptic as a supervillain would be trying to describe why they couldn't come to what might have been the cultural event of 2025.
Yeah, I was sorry to miss it.
Well, so today you are bringing not just your charisma and not just your family name. You're not expecting us to enter this into the omnibus just out of nepotism. You have an actual story to tell. You have something that you want the future to remember. And how are you going to walk us into that?
Slowly.
Good.
I want this to be one of those rambling 100-minute episodes.
Oh.
Are you letting guest hosts do those?
Oh yes. I have found so far, we're new into the project, but I've found so far that the futurelings who have guest hosted have a very good understanding of how to attempt to make a 50-minute episode and have it become an actual 120-minute episode. It's like something baked into the character of futurelings.
Yeah, and I've listened to over 650 episodes of the show, so I think I have a good idea of how to do it. But yeah, no, I don't think we have to ramble. We can get to it. But I mean, it starts with, again, going back to Ken and I, and where our paths diverge. He graduated from high school in Seoul, Korea. I did not.
Isn't that weird? When you really think about it, Isn't that something?
It's a little odd.
Wait, Nathan, were you in the same class as Kathleen Edwards?
I was. Okay, so Kathleen's older brother, Tim Edwards, was in the class between me and Ken, which I've always been irritated with him because he and I think, were up for the final part in our high school production of Godspell, and he got cast instead of me, even though I would have been better.
Edwards!
Yeah, and Tim was musically talented as well, but yeah, Kathleen was a little sister, so she was a grade or two behind me.
Right.
And I didn't generally associate with the Canadians at our school, just out of prejudice. We had a married couple that taught at the school, the high school librarian and his wife who taught computer classes, who were Canadian and had a daughter that was in my class. And they were very, very odd people, which led me to have a disposition toward Canadian people that maybe wasn't entirely fair. And Kathleen is a wonderful person and a great artist.
Well, the language difference, I mean, the Gulf makes it very hard to communicate with Canadians in the best of circumstances.
This was an international school, so we had all kinds of people with all kinds of accents.
So to futurelings that are not deep into the weeds of your childhood in Seoul, Korea, and how it overlaps with my friendship with Kathleen Edwards, the Canadian rock chanteuse, but it comes up periodically when Kathleen wants to communicate something to someone from her high school. She's not in touch with very many people, but she knows that she can have some high school memory exchange with Ken, but he's much older. He thinks of her as like some freshman girl ding-a-ling. Yeah. So, as in so many things, I'm often in between the two where she's like, look, I found this thing from my yearbook. And I'm like, no, I don't care. He doesn't care. I'll send her to you from now on.
Yeah, it's very odd going to an international school because, the alumni are so distributed. It is very hard to connect with people that you knew from school. And so I definitely sympathize. But yeah, again, the whole point of my story is that, we left Korea right after Ken graduated. And so my opportunity to probably get to know Kathleen would have been in my junior and senior year, which I did not spend in Korea, which was unfortunate.
And so where did you graduate from high school?
Singapore, which is the subject of today's episode, if I'm allowed to say so.
Singapore?
Yes. We relocated from Seoul, Korea to Singapore in 1992 and lived there from 92 to 94. My family lived there well into the late 90s. And I went to Singapore American School. Go Eagles.
Go Eagles. Is English one of the lingua franca of Singapore?
It is. Yes.
And what percentage of the business that's transacted in like day-to-day life in Singapore is done in English?
It depends. Most of it's done in either English or Singlish, which is the heavily accented local variety of English that has some of its own interesting tweaks on the original.
Is it a Creole or is it just a kind of patois?
More of a patois. It's not a pidgin or a Creole. It's English, but kind of with some additional suffixes and creative twists on grammar and things. I may be getting that wrong. I have a degree in linguistics, but I never really studied Singlish.
Sure, or really languages at all, it sounds like.
Not really.
My daughter's mother / partner is in internet security, and she often goes to Singapore because it seems to be a technology hub for people who are doing business in China. And she's convinced that Singapore is basically just being run by the Chinese Secret Service now, and that everything that happens there is she's like, it's like Beirut in the 60s. Singapore, every single person that you meet is like a French guy in a white linen suit who is actually working for like a shadowy cabal based out of St. Petersburg, but it's not, and I'm intrigued by the place because I just remember it as some place that you couldn't chew gum.
Yes. But all of that ties together into Singapore's very weird identity that I hope to touch on with today's story a bit. But yeah, I don't know what today's Singapore is like as much. I interact with my company's Singapore office because, again, we also are involved in internet security, and we also are interested in business in China. And so yeah, we have contacts there. But yeah, my personal experience with Singapore is very much frozen in the mid-90s, which was before Singapore became what everybody knows it as today.
Right.
The crazy rich Asians and all of that, very specific imagery related to Singapore. But it was on its way to being that, I think, at the time. And I mean, do you remember what the big thing that Singapore was known for to Americans in the mid-90s?
Yeah, didn't some Americans got arrested for doing something that was maybe not anodyne, but not worth being thrown into some kind of deep prison hole, and it was an international incident?
Yeah, that was the Michael Fay incident, which happened at my school my senior year.
It happened at your school?
Yes. It's not the topic I want to talk about, but it relates to it, and I think it's a good place to start because that was the thing that shaped my perspective on Singapore, having lived there for a couple of years. I was there when it happened, and I knew Michael Fay.
You knew him. So he, if I recall correctly, he was counterfeiting baseball cards? No, it was, what was it? It was
vandalism. It was all vandalism.
Oh, it was, sure. He did some graffiti.
Yep, it was vandalizing cars, stealing street signs, and I believe there may have been some graffiti in the allegations.
That was what I majored in college, that kind of like screw around late at night, like switch the street signs around kind of level of prank. And so I remember that controversy and feeling like, God, that just sounds like any other Tuesday.
Yeah. It was an interesting confluence of things that created that situation. First, a qualifier. When I say I know Michael Fay, I didn't know him well. When I moved to Singapore as a junior, I was frustrated that my parents, who were miserable in Korea, stayed exactly long enough to get Ken out of the door and launched on his way, and then immediately uprooted the rest of us and moved us to another foreign country.
Ken Jennings Sr.
I was not at my best my junior and senior years. I didn't make a lot of friends at Singapore American School. Mm-hmm. I was not much of a presence. You know, again, talking about distributed alumni, I doubt anyone from Singapore American School class of 1994 would have a lot of memories of me. But Michael Fay was in my class, moved in a very different crowd. But at one point, I was asked by the National Honor Society, which was a big deal at that school, to help with some math tutoring, and Michael Fay was one of the students that we were supposed to be helping with math, as I recall.
How big was the school?
Fairly large, but not for an international school. It was slightly larger than Seoul Foreign School, which was what I was used to. I would say there were probably over 100 kids in my graduating class, but under 150 maybe.
So big enough that Michael Fay could be running in some kind of like like party crowd where they were making out under the stands at the football game, and you were working with the chemistry set.
I was sitting alone in the library most of the time.
Oh.
But yeah, he was out there doing his stuff, and but we had front row seats for this, and so we heard when Michael Fay and his friends got arrested. They were not able to see their families or an attorney for a period of several days, and what we were told was when they were first given access to anyone on the outside, they looked like they'd been roughed up a little bit. There was some soft tissue damage, cracked ribs, hearing loss among some of the kids, is what I heard. Extracting confessions. Go ahead.
As a nerd, which I'm just going to assume that we're going to agree that you were a high school nerd.
Sure.
Was there any feeling of Schadenfreude that these hipsters had sustained soft tissue damage and hearing loss as a result of torture by a foreign government?
Well, it wasn't really a foreign government because it was our government. So, I mean, we were all it was very weird for the whole expat community because what it looked like, and probably what it was the Singaporean government, which has long historical ties to, expatriate communities, having been a former British colony, and having been very open to international ties and inviting the world into their city. They were clearly sending a message that they were tired of expatriates playing by a different set of rules, with a side order of maybe sending a message to the U.S. government that they weren't going to be pushed around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, we were all a little bit scared about what this might mean for American families living in Singapore. What happened was that I think that one of the kids, as I recall, was there with the Australian consulate or embassy and got out of the country very quickly on a private plane. A lot of the kids were, I think, locals that may or may not have gone to our school, but were definitely of Chinese ethnicity, which is, the ethnicity of 3/4 of the population of Singapore. And so most of the kids got released, and Michael Fay, I believe, signed a confession to having done, dozens of acts of vandalism that all took place on one night, sometimes miles apart across the city at roughly the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Later, he said that he did steal a street sign, which he couldn't really deny because they found it in his bedroom.
Although you could still deny it.
So he said, yes, I did steal a street sign at one point, but that was just for fun. And none of this keying cars, breaking off car antennas, throwing, bricks through windows, spray painting. He said, none of that was me. I didn't do any of that.
No, that's jerk behavior.
Yeah. So he confessed to all of it. And the international news media descended on my high school for the trial and for the period afterward. I once got interviewed by a reporter coming out of the school after an after-school activity and got asked about, what kind of debauchery I like to get up to. And I described my life, which involved no friends, no socializing, and spending a lot of time on the computer at home. And they were like, you're not giving us anything we can use here. This is not the narrative we're looking for.
Come on, kid.
Yeah, 60 Minutes was there. Everybody was at our school. It was a crazy time.
And do you think that it rewrote, like, long-term, the relationship between Singapore and the United States? Was this just a momentary corrective on the part of some overzealous bureaucrat or police chief, or did this actually reestablish a kind of new international order where the rules of neo-colonialism were a thing of the past, and now it was a new co-prosperity sphere in Asia?
Well, everything was part of. It's oversimplifying, but I think it's illuminating to say that everything that happens on this scale in Singapore is driven by a single force and voice, because at that time, the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, had been the Prime Minister of Singapore for its entire existence. And so everything that happened related to Singapore on the global stage was the vision of Lee Kuan Yew being manifest. And I'm going to jump back and talk about a little bit more about Singapore history after we're done talking about Michael Fay, if I can. But yeah, I think that at that time, Singapore's strategy was to cozy up to China a little bit more, because China was an economic opportunity. America was a long-standing partner, but they wanted to show that they weren't just a pushover and a lackey to the American imperialists, but that they had the ability to stand up and make Bill Clinton beg the Singaporean government not to cane Michael Fay 6 times, which they were receptive to by saying, we'll cane him 4 times.
Right.
And caning was pretty serious business. They did a lot of caning in Singapore, and I got the impression that caning could be very serious depending, right? The rules around caning in Singapore were that caning could only be administered by a martial arts black belt. Caning could involve cutting through the flesh of the lower back and buttocks all the way down to the spinal cord and result in...
Say what?
Yeah, potential paralysis. I think people were paralyzed from severe canings.
Wow.
But it was understood that was what caning entailed. Usually copious bleeding, right? Like the bamboo switch that they use could cut inches through the soft tissue of the buttocks.
So not just a spanking is what you're saying.
No. Oh, and it was funny because it was characterized a lot as that in the media.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the one other thing that I think is telling is that you could not cane someone who was not conscious. And so with longer caning sessions, particularly people that had higher sentences, I think was known that you would use smelling salts to revive a prisoner so that the caning could continue.
So this seems like a practice derived from like the Admiralty rules of the 18th century. Like it feels very master and commander in a way.
Again, very, very incisive of you to point that out because, yeah, another factor in Singaporean history is its colonialist history that still rears its head all the time in an interesting way. But yeah, so Michael Fay was not spanked. I think they went easy on him because I think they knew if they paralyzed an American teenager, that would not play great.
No.
But I mean, I think it was enough of an incident that, I mean, even though the caning itself was probably okay but not great, the overall incident, I think, was really rough on him as a person. I think he came back to the school once after being released from custody and said hi to some friends in the cafeteria before flying back to the United States. I never went to the cafeteria because I had no friends, and so I didn't see him that day. But
wait a minute, did you need friends to go to the cafeteria? Was that something like there was somebody at the door that was like, wait a minute, you're not allowed in here? I would think the cafeteria would be open to all.
It was, I never went to the cafeteria intentionally as part of my campaign to show my parents that I was determined never to make any friends.
Oh, I see. It was a form of protest that you were going to be friendless.
Yes. As
a way of punishing your parents for this move.
I mean, you've experienced my sparkling personality. It would have to be intentional, right?
You're right. You had to hide your light under a bushel.
I was trying hard. Yeah. One of my only claims to fame at the school is that in my senior year, I did win the superlative for most antisocial. And they took a picture of me with my very long hair combed down over my face so that you couldn't see anything.
That's so grunge. I can't even...
This was high grunge. This was 1994.
Wow. Well, the funny thing about countries around the world that, or situations, groups, you see this often with sort of terrorist groups or people trying to make political statements on the national stage. They want to attract American media attention, but then once they do, they often don't realize what kind of monster they have let out.
Yeah.
And you cannot, ultimately, it's very hard to control what American media attention decides what kind of multi-headed beast that is going to be.
Yeah.
And you see over the course of my life, I've watched a lot of groups have press conferences where they suddenly realize what they've truly done. CBS News is like, CBS News did not know we existed, and now we really wish that we could go back to a time before they knew we existed.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael Fay was portrayed by Emilio Estevez on an episode of Saturday Night Live.
Oh.
They did a cold open in, I think it was the long downhill slide of SNL in the mid-90s. Kevin Nealon's final season, maybe. He played the man administering the caning to Michael Fay, played by Emilio Estevez, who was, strapped to a rack strategically so that you could not see, whether his, actual bare buttocks were being exposed.
Right.
But the gag was that the guy doing the caning was so super nice and just wanted to be a great experience. So not a bad cold open, and not bad to have yourself being portrayed by Emilio Estevez at the height of his powers.
Well, wasn't this Emilio Estevez at a point in his career where he was playing opposite like animatronic dogs, or was he in a relationship with where he was a detective and his partner was some kind of like bulldog, or am I thinking of some other actor?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know he was doing Mighty Ducks around this time.
Oh, maybe that's what I was thinking about.
It was post Brat Pack, but he was doing, kids movies and family movies. He did some stuff with Charlie Sheen. I think they did a couple things together where they, playing off the fact that they were brothers. I'm not sure what he was on SNL for in 94.
Have you seen him recently? He looks exactly like his father.
Which is, there's worse ways to look. But I look exactly like my father, and I wish I looked like Martin Sheen.
The last time I saw Emilio Estevez give an interview, and I don't remember what it was for, but I was like, he's Martin Sheen. And yet Martin Sheen is still Martin Sheen.
I know. Yeah, that's true. He still looks like Martin Sheen as well.
Yeah. Do you feel like you look like your dad and your dad looks like your dad, and that two men enter, one man leaves kind of situation?
Met both of us. I don't.
Yeah, I have.
I don't look quite as old as my dad, but no. I think there's more of a similarity there than probably Ken. Ken is TV handsome. That's different. Ken is TV handsome because they cover him with spackle now. They draw his eyebrows on with a Sharpie. But let's leave that aside. There's plenty of time for you and for the two of us to roast your brother. The other thing that happened, Michael, with Michael Fay was that he was, I think, a verse in a Weird Al song that same year, where he did, it was a Weird Al parody of the Crash Test Dummies humming song, which was big that year. And they made a verse about Michael Fay once there was a boy who went to Singapore and scratched up some cars or something like that. But after that, he disappeared off the map. And my understanding is that there may have been some substance abuse issues. I heard from friends. I think he ended up in Orlando and worked at the theme parks.
Wow.
Which is interesting because...
The story took a dark turn right at the end.
I wish I could track him down and find out that he's doing okay. But yeah, I think the Singaporean government wanted to make an example of someone, and whoever they decided on, it was probably going to ruin their life. And so that's just how that played out for him.
Michael, if you're listening, we tease because we love, and we hope you're doing well, and reach out if you want to come on the show and do an episode on, doesn't have to be on caning. It could be on whatever you like. And
maybe if I'd helped him with his math, we could have avoided all of this. So that's my big regret. And
Nathan,
so I apologize for that as well.
I want you to forgive yourself. I forgive you. I want you to know that this isn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It's not your fault, Nathan.
Thank you. Just hearing you say that means a lot.
Can you walk us through the colonial history of Singapore? What role did it play in geopolitics from the first time that a three-masted sailing ship entered the harbor until the post-World War II realignment of Asia? Go.
Okay, so again, just to refer to the addenda episodes, I haven't had a ton of time to do a lot of research, and so
that stands up to the omnibus way.
Okay,
that's what Ken said every morning.
I did learn from the best. When I was at Singapore American School, I took a course in Singapore history from Jim Baker, who was one of the best teachers at the school and had lived in Singapore basically his whole life.
So not the Jim Baker that people my age would know.
This is Jim Baker with 1K.
1K. Okay.
He basically looked like Kurt Vonnegut and wore Hawaiian shirts every day and was an irascible weirdo that had a lot of really interesting perspectives on Singaporean history.
I love him.
A lot of fun. Yeah, great guy. He's written some great books on Singaporean history. He's these days, I think, a bit of an authority on the subject, although he's long retired. But yeah, I found his classes very engaging. I took his class on Singaporean history and his class on the history of the Indian subcontinent. And not to brag, but I was the Asian Studies Student of the Year that year because Mr. Baker, I think, was impressed with my engagement with his subject matter. But yeah, he taught us all about Singaporean history from, having seen a lot of it himself. I think I may have also taken Vietnam history from him because he talked a lot about the Vietnam War. He's one of those guys.
Yeah, sure. I imagine it played a shaping role in the region. Yeah.
Well, very big on the fact that the U.S. intervention in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia generally to try to stop the domino effect and the spread of communism had not been great overall, and had not been great for Singapore, and had not been great for Vietnam as well. But
wait a minute, you're telling me that the domino theory, that there's some question in your mind as to whether
there
or
were
not
some holes. Yeah.
we stopped the spread of global communism by bombing Dien Bien Phu?
But they're not actually holes, because dominoes don't have holes. They don't go all the way through. I think the divots in a domino are called pips or something, aren't they?
Pips, yeah, they are. They are.
But yeah, that's getting ahead. This history of Singapore starts, I think, in the early 19th century, when basically it was an empty island off of the tip of the peninsula of Malaya. Some fishermen did some stuff there, but not much going on.
So it was not always a kind of city-state like a Venice of Asia. It was just like a bog.
Yeah, interestingly, you would think, especially considering the large Chinese population there, that there might have been something going on pre-British colonialism, but there wasn't. It was the Dutch East India Company that got there first. Stanford Raffles, who was a big shot at the Dutch East India Company, asked for permission to establish a port there because it was a good spot, kind of central to Southeast Asia, close to Malaya, close to Borneo, close to a lot of other things, where you could have a big harbor and kind of a lot of land for plantations and stockyards to create a shipping port and a gateway to the southeast of Asia.
Now, were Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta already major centers, or were those also sort of nascent cities?
I think they were both already in existence, because those are countries with those are cities that are part of historical nations that have been around for a long time.
Right.
Singapore was very intentionally created artificially, and so yeah, the British built forts and plantations and a big harbor, and I think because of the Opium Wars and other things that were going on in China, huge numbers of Chinese nationals migrated there for work, and within the first couple decades, Malayan immigrants came across as well from Malaya, and for work and for jobs as well. But yeah, it was pretty much a Chinese majority with a lot of British expatriates and Malayan workers in the mix as well. But yeah, the mercantile trade was definitely dominated from the start by the British and the Chinese there.
So I think of Singapore as being one of those cities where it's colonial architecture. You go there and it feels like you're very much like in a kind of, it's maybe a little bit like, what is the second city of China?
Shanghai?
Shanghai. It wasn't Shanghai also before the big explosion. Shanghai was also had this kind of colonial architecture vibe that was, I had a chance to go to Shanghai in the 90s, and I remember kind of studying it and feeling like, wow, what an approachable, like human scale town. And I was really excited to go. And now I look at it and it's just like a crazy, like off-world mega city. But
city of the future. Yeah. Singapore is the same. Yeah.
But my confusion about Singapore and the Chinese influence there is that it is nowhere near China. We in American geography classes, this area of the world is understudied, and a lot of people kind of, and myself included, have only a vague sense of like the jungles of Borneo are over here and Sumatra is somewhat over here, but it's not. It is as far away from China as Colombia is from the United States, or maybe even further.
Yes.
Why would it become a majority Chinese population? It doesn't seem like the British would have had a vested interest in bringing Chinese workers when there would have been Malayan people already there. How did that come to pass?
I don't know too much about that. I tried to look into that because, yeah, I had thought that the Chinese had been there first and then the British came second. But yeah, it was definitely the British established a presence. And then I think because the Chinese ports, I think, had access to seagoing steamships, which were new, that allowed a lot of movement of goods. And they were kind of they had, you know, the capital and the interest in international trade to kind of dominate the sea trade of you know, South Asia. And, you know, I think Hong Kong was already established, which is a similar situation. But yeah, I think that the fact that Chinese ships were traveling everywhere and moving goods all over Asia, and Britain said this is a place where trade is going to happen in Southeast Asia, made it a huge opportunity. And again, you know, the events in China were not creating a lot of great opportunities with the Opium Wars and such. That yeah, I think it just resulted in a gold rush of people seeking the economic opportunity there. The growth of the rubber trade, I think, came soon thereafter, brought tons of money to Singapore and the region. And yeah, I think the Chinese were just well positioned to get in on that and get it on the ground floor.
So it wasn't sugar cane. It was rubber was the thing that made the fortunes of Singapore.
It was a lot of things, but yeah, I think the huge explosion in the rubber trade in Southeast Asia was probably the biggest factor. Yeah.
And I'm right that it has an equatorial climate, maybe almost to the extent that human beings should not be able to survive in that kind of humidity and temperature. Was that your experience living there?
My experience living there was, yeah, it's very equatorial. It's fun. The sun sets at exactly the same time all year round. That's kind of cool.
That is cool.
It's you know exactly what the weather is going to generally be like. It's going to be pretty muggy, and it's probably going to rain for about 90 minutes in the afternoon, after which everything, all the plants, I think, in the rain give off, you know, some kind of chemicals that make the whole place smell like cat vomit for about an hour after it rains.
Oh, God, that's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say the plants give off chemicals and the birds all sing and everybody like lays down and makes love in the afternoon.
No, it's
Cat
not
vomit.
that it's not that idyllic. You know, the giant nutria rats are scuttling around in the drainage pipes. You know,
They're not
after
really
the rain.
nutria. They're just rats.
I'm not sure what variety they are. They're pretty nutria-esque. There may be a variety of Southeast Asian rat that you mistake as a house cat until you look a little closer.
Okay, all right. Malaysian rat is not a thing. My daughter yesterday was like, wanted to see my internet search history. And I was like,
Okay.
I don't know if you do want to see it, but okay. And she started looking at the things that I had tabs open for.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, and I'm sure this is true for you too, I mean, this is one of the reasons that Ken and I started the Omnibus, was that we had this similar set of like 40 open tabs, not a single one even remotely connected to any other, like a broad survey of just
Looking up random things.
just random, insane kind of like, oh yeah, well then this and that. But Malaysian super rat was not a thing that I was on my bingo card to be in my search history. And apparently a Malayan field rat is a species of wood rat. And it is like, larger than your average bear.
All right. Those may be what we were seeing.
No, maybe not, though. This doesn't seem like a nutria. Well, anyway,
we called them nutria. I remember that. Like we talked about the nutria in the sewers in Singapore. So I don't know. But again, I typically associate those with the Everglades. So I don't know. Maybe that was just an expat thing that we called all the big rats nutria.
It is. Well, now, this normally if you were Ken in this situation, he and I would be beeping this out of the show. Beep. Because we both like to pretend that we already knew a ton of stuff about rats in Singapore.
Oh, yeah.
But in this situation, I'm not gonna, there's no pretense that either you or I are like coming at this with like pre-knowledge. And so I'm just going to come right out and say that I just Googled, are there nutria in Singapore? And artificial intelligence wants me to know, no, there are not. The semi-aquatic mammals commonly cited in Singapore are otters. But I don't think you mistook an otter. I don't think the sewers of Singapore are full of otters.
I don't think they're full of otters. I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Moving on. I know that's not what your show's.
And they were probably not nutria, because if so, we would have been cooking and eating them because they're so nutritious.
Wait a minute.
Hey, I got the bell.
You got a bell.
Thanks for letting me know that I don't get to use the beep as well. I was thinking of invoking it, but
no. You can use the beep all you want. It's just that Mark Miles, as you know, probably as a longtime listener, Mark Miles is only barely paying attention to the show as he edits it. So we have to really, if you're going to beep something, we have to make a point out of it.
I'm barely paying attention and I'm on it, so that's right. I get it.
And as a longtime listener, you know that our listeners are pretty much using this to go to sleep. Or they're trying to cook and, they're yelling at their kids. Or a lot of them, this is something I didn't know, are practicing law.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Trying to fall asleep after a long day of practicing law, in my experience.
Are you on the clock right now? That's another thing I think our listeners are dying to know. It's a work from home day for me. But and I let my boss know that I would not be monitoring emails. It's close to the end of our fiscal year, so things are pretty busy at work. But I did tell him that this was important enough that I blocked off the afternoon for it. Okay, all right.
And he's feeling sorry for me because I had to go to my cousin's funeral yesterday, so he told me to take the afternoon off.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you had to go to your cousin's funeral yesterday.
Yeah, it was a cousin of ours that was same age as Ken, and we were friends as kids, and passed away suddenly. And so I was representing the Jennings clan yesterday in Springville, Utah, at his service, and got to see a lot of people. But it was a lot of people dealing with a lot of feelings, and it was a little bit of a rough day. So this is actually a really nice balm for that. I appreciate having the opportunity to unwind and take the afternoon off with you.
Well, that's the thing about being men in our 50s. It is remarkable how often people die, or starting to die, and it's often just like, what?
Yeah, I'm starting to die as we speak, I think.
I've been dying since the 90s, but yeah. Okay, so we've established that the streets of Singapore are full of giant rats or otters.
It's a lovely city. I had a rough time there, and I think I've been open about how I did not go to Singapore with a good attitude.
Yeah.
But it was a fascinating place to live. There's more to it than the rats, I would say. I was just saying that it's not an idyllic paradise, but it is lovely and predictable. It was described to me by a lot of people who were warning me about moving there that it's like a Disneyland version of Asia, right? Like everything is fake, everything is very regimented, everything is very clean. You have to be very careful to follow the rules all the time. But my experience was that wasn't that far off, at least at the time when I was living there.
As a as a floppy banged, slouchy, sullen teen,
Oh yeah.
did you come up against social approbation when you were slouching around the town? Did people wag their fingers at you crossly and say, "Get a haircut"?
No. I got more flack for having long hair on the army bases in Korea, to be honest. That was where I got yelled at for being a hippie quite a lot from American GIs who, in retrospect, were only probably about 3 years older than me, although it didn't seem like it at the time. But yeah, no, in Singapore was crawling with expats of all varieties and sullen teens of all varieties at the time, and so it was not unusual. But I had a bad attitude towards the social engineering that is everywhere in Singapore, and we'll get to that in a minute. To fast forward through the rest of the British colonialism, Japan defeated the Brits in Singapore during World War II, the Battle of Singapore.
They did. That was a big event.
Yeah, the surrender of Singapore was a big deal. Reportedly, it did not go down well with anyone. Churchill particularly called it, the worst surrender of the entire war of England. So yeah, the Japanese took over Singapore, and the Brits were out. A lot of them were put into it was mostly Australian military, representing the British Armed Forces there at the time. And so, they were all put in a small prison camp until the end of the war. And then everything just went into chaos when the Japanese surrendered. There was a couple really rough years, I think, after the end of the war, trying to reestablish what was going to happen with Singapore. The British came back. There was executions of Japanese officers. There was a lot of turmoil, but gradually the British government decided to give Singapore more and more autonomy, allowing them to establish a government that had limited capabilities, and then gradually expanding those. At first denying them because they felt like they needed to stay in the region because of the domino theory. They were worried about the spread of communism. But once the Singapore government made assurances that they would stop the spread of communism, they were given more and more autonomy. And it ended up being a very, very amicable parting, unlike the endings of most of the other colonial situations in Southeast Asia. Former Dutch colonies famously do not love the Dutch. Former French colonies famously do not love the French.
It's almost written in the constitutions.
Yeah. But Singapore kind of modeled itself, and again, this was something you were alluding to, on the colonialist model in its transition to autonomy. And a lot of it goes back to the People's Action Party. People's Action Party? That doesn't sound right.
People's Action Party?
Is that what the PAP is? Sorry. Maybe we should beep this. Because
People's Autonomy Party? No, that seems...
No, it's the People's Action Party. It just sounded wrong when it came out of my mouth. But yeah, that was Lee Kuan Yew, right? Not initially, but he rose to the top of the People's Action Party very quickly.
This differs very much from the relationship of Hong Kong and Macau, because those transitions were much later and kind of set on a timer, and they were actually sort of cessations of it, or it was a handover rather than this model, which is kind of what America hoped would happen in Vietnam, and didn't. Why? And this is completely, and it's happening. At the same time as the partition of India, but there was no revolution.
Yeah, this was in the 50s and early 60s, and there was some turmoil and there was some civil unrest. But Lee Kuan Yew was a Cambridge-educated attorney who, at the time, was going by Harry Yew. He did away with that.
You're a Harry Yew.
When he rose to prominence in Singapore, he stopped using that name, but close family and friends called him Harry throughout his entire life, even though he was the great Lee Kuan Yew to everyone else. But yeah, he made a lot of assurances, even though the People's Action Party was a populist party on its face that was kind of led by labor groups and the workers. They were strictly anti-communist, which created a very kind of odd situation where they had to be both things at the same time. And I think that created the situation where they could not stomach there being any opposition of any kind. And the People's Action Party became the only tolerable option. They used the tools of colonialist England, arrests without and detainment without charge, lack of due process, and other kind of strong arm tactics to keep people in line, but as if they were colonialisming themselves, almost,
Colonialisming themselves.
That's a phrase my kids like to say when they do something that is insensitive. They say, "Oops, did I do a colonialism?"
Wow. Do they ever say to you, "Stop colonizing me"?
No, they know that there's no way I'm ever going to stop colonizing them. I've been colonizing their little brains from the beginning.
That's the right attitude. There's the American dad I was looking for. So yeah, and this is not uncommon across the political spectra, where what the new government decides is that they're just not going to tolerate dissent, whether it is tolerate dissent from capitalist lackeys or tolerate dissent from labor agitators. It's interesting that they're doing the National Socialist kind of, we're populist workers, peoples, but also not at all about labor earning the means or owning the means of production.
Yeah. I think that it was driven a lot by, by fear of a lot of things, right? You have a party that is dominated by the ruling Chinese class of Singapore that are far from home and, far from their ancestral home. It is their home, but, they're surrounded by nations that represent the minority populations, right? Singapore is 75% Chinese, 10% Malay, 10% Indian, mostly Tamil, South Asian speaking communities, and then a smattering of expats. But being able to maintain control meant maintaining control for the Chinese ruling class, maintaining control from the non-communist elements that were very much considered troublesome at the time. And so the authoritarianism was kind of, it's what they've called, it was all couched in Lee Kuan Yew's, legal language that he learned at Cambridge, where it was all in the language of democracy, but without any of the freedoms associated with democracy. They call it an illiberal democracy, is what they call Singapore.
That's a delicate balance.
Yeah. And it was a really weird thing that they pulled off because, they were separating from Britain and their colonial ties, but Malaya at the time was assembling a new nation, and Singapore was invited to be part of Malaysia, and they were part of Malaysia at first, along with Sabah and Sarawak, and I think Brunei was invited initially as well, though Brunei, I think, didn't end up sticking around in the long term either. But Singapore joined Malaysia and then did not want to share.
Right. Dejoined.
They didn't really agree with the economic leveling of the playing field across the provinces of Malaysia, and they said, you know what, maybe we'll do our own thing. And but before they could quit, they got fired. Malaysia expelled Singapore from the country, and then they became a completely independent country under the rule of Lee Kuan Yew and the People's Action Party, which remained in control for until present. Almost without any opposition for most of its history, for most of the 50 years that Lee Kuan Yew controlled the country.
Was there an influx of Taiwanese and nationalist Chinese after the revolution in China? Was it a location that Chinese anti-communists were any part of the diaspora, or was the ruling class of Chinese there many generational, long established, and not even really culturally connected?
Yeah, I think most of them had been there a long time. You know, the long Chinese history going back to the 1820s in Singapore. I think there have been, you know, there have always been immigrants over the years, Chinese immigrants as much as people from other places. Again, you know, it's very common for Malay people to go there for work. A big influx of Filipino people at different time periods, but again, you know, mostly for as part of the working class. But I get the impression it's the established historical Chinese community has dominated and hasn't really been troubled too much by, you know, huge influxes of additional Chinese nationals coming in at different periods. Although I may be wrong about that.
It is its own country. Would you describe it as a city-state? Is there anything to Singapore other than just the city of Singapore?
Not really. I mean, it's a state. It's an island that is almost entirely covered by a city. Technically, there's 64 islands. Most of the other islands are inconsequential of size. One of the larger major islands on the south side of Singapore is Sentosa, which I am now mentioning our subject matter for the first time.
1 hour and 1 minute into the show. Well done. You're bringing that Jennings, the Jennings long intro.
I think I can tie it all together because we've built the foundation for the actual story, though.
That's it. That's how it works.
Sentosa ties into the Michael Fay story and also into the history of Singapore. I talked about the Australian prisoners of war during World War II. Sentosa is where they were sent. Prior to that, there had been, some forts there defending the south side of Singapore. There were some cannons and forts built there by the British military, but it was mostly just in a small empty island on the south side of Singapore that became used as a POW camp during World War II.
But it's one of those islands that kind of guards the entrance to the harbor, right?
Yeah, right there, smack in the middle of the south side of Singapore. It's right there, and yeah, they've had trouble figuring out what to do with it. They built a cable car from the mainland to the hill at the top of Sentosa Island very early on, before there was any reason to take a cable car there, except to kind of fly over the harbor, see the city from a height, and then come back.
Yeah.
But
build it and they will come.
Yeah. But they had an idea that it could kind of be a beautiful park area, again, because, Singapore is an island of limited real estate. There's not a lot of room for big things in Singapore. It comes down, it goes to the extent that, the HDB, the Housing Development Board, I believe it is, of the Singaporean government, runs almost all of the housing that everyone in Singapore lives in. 80% of the population, it was as high as 90 at certain points, live in government-owned housing, high-rise apartments owned by the government, built by the government.
Even rich people are living in government housing.
Yeah, except for the very crazy rich, as we know, who have their own houses that we've seen in movies.
Yes.
But yeah, it's very common for very well-off people to buy a 99-year lease. That's how the HDB sells these. They sell you a 99-year lease to an apartment that is exactly the same as everyone else's. And so you can have a high-rise apartment building with a huge economic disparity from unit to unit because everyone lives in identical apartments.
So it's not just that the government owns the apartment buildings, but that the apartment buildings are not that the apartments aren't different from one another. There aren't rich apartments and poor apartments. They're just all the same apartment, and it depends on like what kind of furniture you put in there, whether you're rich or not.
Well, there's lots of variations because they were all built at different periods. Some are certainly more monetary than more modern than others. But yeah, I think generally the idea is that it's an equalizing factor that we all kind of live in the same housing when we live in Singapore. And like you say, it's not just the furniture though. That I think HDB units are, at least at the time. Again, all of this is, I think, still true today to a certain extent, but was definitely true in the 90s when I was there. The parking lot is where you saw the big differences,
right?
Because people could buy very, very fancy cars, and you would know the status of a person not by where they lived, but by other signifiers like their car.
Right, and their watch.
And Singapore makes it very expensive to buy a car because, again, the roads and parking are also very limited. So to get a registration on a car could at the time that I lived there cost almost six figures just to get a registration on a car. And so, when we lived in Singapore, we owned a Mitsubishi Galant, I want to say. And the license plate on the car cost easily 3 times what the car itself cost.
That's incredible.
But again, that's just a factor to kind of explain the real estate situation.
Well, here in the Socialist People's Marxist Republic of Seattle, like a lot of, I think, one of the attempts or policies that often floated as a way of equalizing people's experience in the city is that when development is approved, when big buildings are approved, there's always a component where there's affordable housing included in what would otherwise be a market rate and in some cases luxury building.
Right.
The idea being that if you want to build a 25-story luxury apartment building, 20% or 18% of those apartments are going to be affordable housing, and that's how we're going to create an equal society full of happy and healthy workers. And of course, that policy is a form of urbanism, and it has had very mixed results.
As it does.
But very interesting to think that this model, in this different way, you've just now given me an insight into thinking about Singapore that I'm going to sit and churn on for a while.
Yeah, nobody nanny states like Singapore. The People's Action Party, again, a lot of it driven by their colonial history, fear of the domino theory and the threat of communism, and also just kind of feeling sensitive of where they are located geographically, right? Like they want to make sure everything is exactly as it should be, right? And so controlling the housing, again, the strict laws about chewing gum and other things. There was propaganda everywhere when I lived there. And, it's funny because the Singapore Straits Times is famous for being the mouthpiece of the People's Action Party, even though it's the big Singaporean newspaper. It's technically privately owned, but even being privately owned, if they want to operate under the rules, the laws of Singapore, they have to do what the government tells them to do. And so it was a propaganda rag. Whatever the government was concerned about was blazoned everywhere immediately. If there was a slight downturn in population growth, the next day the sides of buses and the subway stations would be plastered with posters about how beautiful babies are and start a family today, and the government is in favor of you having more children. It was that level. And then if they saw a spike in population growth, which they didn't see a lot of by that time, then immediately a new set of posters would come out and be like, hey, hang on, have you heard about using protection? That kind of thing.
And do you get the feeling that there was a healthy skepticism or a kind of a shared underground sensibility that the people had, where they recognized they were being manipulated and where the government wasn't entirely a trustworthy voice, and there were subcultures of people that were not resistance, but that were there were book groups of intellectuals where they scoffed at this, or was there enough conformity? It wasn't like the people of Bulgaria where they are where they're being forced to pledge loyalty oaths, but they're
no. I mean, they were all doing very well, right? Like, and it's hard to be too upset when things are going well, right? And that was always the defense in Singapore, was like, hey, it's working, right? Like, we're the best, and if this is what makes us the best, let's keep doing it. Yeah, I think there were always dissidents, and again, getting spirited away by the government on some kind of under the civil protection laws of the country was always a threat for people like that. And again, we'll play into the core part of the story here in a minute. But
I'm sorry, we're out of time. So you've
oh, come on. If you're going to call the episode Exiled to Sentosa, we have to get to the part about the guy that got exiled to Sentosa.
Carry on.
Okay. So the other big thing that happened at my high school, well, it wasn't one of the big, it was one of the funny things that people would talk about, when we as expatriates talked about how weird Singapore is. There's propaganda everywhere. Or just one other quick anecdote about that. I one night on Singaporean television, I was watching the big news story of the evening on the local news was there was real estate scams going around, and everyone should be careful about real estate scammers. It was a new trend. They wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this. And a locally made sitcom came on at the end of the news, and the plot of the episode was about one of the members of this family, the titular family of the show, had been taken by a real estate scammer. And it was like, that's how constantly embedded the messaging from the government was in everything that happened.
Wow.
And the story we talked about at school was, did you know that the Singaporean government has exiled a guy to the amusement park resort island of Sentosa, and he's never allowed to leave?
But aren't there, isn't there a cable car? Was there no bridge to Sentosa? It was either a cable car or a mosquito fleet.
Interestingly, a boat pulled the cable car down in the early 80s, and a bunch of people died. And so the cable car was viewed with some skepticism after that, although they rebuilt it bigger and better, and then kind of had better rules about how ships could pass under the cable car in the harbor. But yeah, no, they built a monorail and a causeway, and eventually, there's even like I think a walking path across the island now. You can walk to Sentosa.
So how do you exile? How is Sentosa politically distinct enough from the rest of the city? It sounds like exiling someone to West Seattle. Like, how would you do it?
Yeah, again, you got to nanny state pretty hard. But the Korean, the Singaporean law enforcement, I think, are largely in place to make sure people are only where they're supposed to be. And I didn't know the story of the mythical guy who was exiled to Sentosa. At school, people thought it was great, because in the early 90s when we were there, they were just opening the cool new batch. The old golf courses and resorts had closed down in the 80s, and it was empty for a while. And then they were opening up new ones. And people were talking about how you could go to Sentosa. There was a brand new water park. There was cool stuff to see. The beaches there were great. It would be great to be exiled to Sentosa. It's a paradise. Like, what teenager wouldn't want to, live in a world of water slides every day and be told they can never leave,
Right.
We thought it sounded great.
Exiled to Orlando, although as we know in America, that is actually a nightmare.
I know. Ironically, it's where Michael Fay ended up.
Right.
So aren't we all exiled to Sentosa, the Sentosa of the mind?
Oh, we're all exiled to the Sentosa of the mind. So is there any memorial to the prison camps, or has it all been erased and wiped clean and turned into a golf course community?
There was, I can't remember the name of it. There was a wax museum about the history of Sentosa and World War II period Singapore, I think it was called the Surrender Rooms or something very bizarre. But again, it had fallen out of fashion and been closed down. Sentosa, I think they finally figured out what to do with Sentosa, because now Sentosa is crazy. It's Universal Studios Singapore is there, and there's a Battlestar Galactica themed roller coaster. It's where the meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un happened.
Sure.
So it's a cool place now. But when our friend Chia Tai-po was exiled to Sentosa, he was the only permanent resident.
Oh, it was the place that you went in and hung out, but then you went home at night. There weren't apartments there.
There were, I think, hotels that had been closed, and there were hotels that were under construction. But again, that late 80s period, nobody was living there.
Oh.
And Chia Tai-po was not, it was the end of his sentence, not the beginning. He had been an early anti-PAP dissident in the 60s in Singapore. He was
as a communist or as a, well, you'll get to
the
that.
question. The question is, was he a communist? He was imprisoned for being a communist. He has always asserted that he was not a communist. And the question of his communism was the result of him being one of the longest serving political prisoners in the world's history, modern history. Up there with Nelson Mandela, although he hates being compared with Nelson Mandela. He had
kind of an unfair comparison for a lot of people. Like,
he did not do the things that Nelson Mandela did, except suffer in a room by himself for years and years and years. But yeah, he was a college grad, I think assistant professor in physics at a university in Singapore, and was involved during this kind of turmoil, post-Malaysia period, rise of the People's Action Party, and the Vietnam War picking up. He was part of a group that was demonstrating against the U.S. participation in the Vietnam War and other kind of populist issues that led people to the conclusion that he may be a member of the MCP, the Malayan Communist Party, which was the Communist Party of Malaysia that had made some inroads in Singapore.
But Malaysia had already indicated that it didn't want Singapore.
Correct. But they were still closely tied in a lot of ways, and in a lot of the kind of non-politically dominant movements, I think there was still a lot of feeling of cordiality across the border. Because, Singapore is connected to Johor Bahru at the tip of Malaya by a causeway as well. So you can drive from Kuala Lumpur to Sentosa if you want.
Right.
So yeah, there was a lot of closeness there. But he was part of a group of 25 people that were rounded up in 1966. Again, in addition to these kind of civil protection laws that allowed immediate detainment of people without charge, there were also a lot of severe limits, again, because of some civil unrest, on, freedom to gather in groups. What do you call that? What's the freedom to gather in groups called?
Freedom of association?
Yeah, freedom of association. In addition to freedom of speech and freedom of the press, there were strict limits on all of this stuff. And he was advocating, protesting a variety of different things, the authoritarianism of the People's Action Party, the Vietnam War, other things that were going on that we felt were kind of, they felt were troubling issues at the time. And he was detained with a group of other people at the age of 25. He was just kind of a young grad student type who was arrested with a group of other protesters. The other protesters all signed a confession that said that they were communists and that they were renouncing violence, and they were all immediately set free. Not immediately, but probably eventually set free.
So he wasn't just arrested as some kind of appeasement of the United States as a way of kind of reinforcing the special friendship. He actually posed some risk to Singapore and to the PAP that wasn't just a sort of like international puppet show, but they really were sowing dissent.
Yeah, the wheels were already grinding in Singapore against there being an opposition of any kind. And he was a political opposition leader at the age of 25 because there was very little opposition to be had. So he considered a political opponent. The PAP at the time was not really considering the viability of any opposition parties. Mm-hmm. And so was he a threat to Singapore? Possibly not. Possibly, if the dissidents had been able to operate a little bit more clearly and create a better political balance in Singapore, a two-party system of some kind, maybe Singapore would be in a better place today in certain ways. Maybe not economically, but maybe the people would have more freedoms. It's possible. But yeah, the power, he was a threat to the powers that be, definitely. And he did not sign the confession because he said, the confession says that I am a communist, and I am not a communist. I have never said I was a communist. And the confession requires that I denounce violent action, which would require an admission that I had ever advocated violence, which I have not.
What percentage of political prisoners in your experience are political prisoners because they take an ethical stand to one degree or another, where it isn't that they are taking an ethical stand, or it isn't that they're refusing to renounce their group that will send people to their deaths or that will result in their family being thrown into prison, but they're just refusing on principle to sign a confession that has no. They're willing to live in captivity for most of their lives rather than just say like, okay, whatever. I mean, Nelson Mandela was in jail.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of political prisoners have a lot more going on and a lot more complex motives. In the case of Chia Tai-po, it seems very clear it was just the one thing. He did not want to admit the thing that they wanted him to admit. He was willing to be an example of Singapore being bad as something to point to for reasons why Singapore should be changed and improved.
But he wasn't martyring himself exactly. He was just, I'm going to be the one alternative to this capitalist nanny state. And did he even have a proposal of what he represented? It was just he represented not that.
Yeah. He represented the need for due process, right? And habeas corpus and things like that, right?
Right, okay, sure.
And at various times, he was in solitary confinement in a variety of Singaporean prisons, lost his eyesight, his health was very poor. They would bring his father in with a written confession and force him to sit in a room with his father under pressure to sign a confession. They would drive him through the city and show him how great Singapore had become and said, wouldn't you like to sign a confession and immediately have access to all of these things?
So they wouldn't get off the confession either. The Singapore, no. The PAP was also going to stand on principle here.
It was very specifically a one-on-one contest of wills between Lee Kuan Yew and Chia Tai-po.
Wow. Long after even probably the language of the confession was no longer relevant in any kind of
Yeah, he was
context.
Never formally charged. Well, I mean, maybe not never. I think at some point they kind of threw some stuff together. He wasn't able to prove his birth in 1941, had been in Singapore. The documentation was hard to find, and so they revoked his citizenship. But yeah, just they gradually eroded his rights without he never saw trial, and he was in prison until 1989.
Wow.
And, because of the way the 80s went and, kids were super into Amnesty International and things like that at the time. I was a member of the Amnesty International branch of Seoul Foreign School at that time. We were all writing letters about guys like Chia Tai-po, and Singapore decided it was not a great look for them entering the 90s to continue to have this guy in prison where he'd been since 1966, which is why they sent him to Sentosa.
Oh, wait. Sentosa was not where he went. Originally, he did 23 years in prison. And
yeah, he was in prison, solitary confinement for a lot of it, for decades.
Wow. So, I mean, Gandhi, or most sort of the passive resistance model through that same era, were trying to expel foreign powers or trying to overthrow white supremacy or trying in some way to resist what would be an outside influence and trying to inspire a populist uprising. In this case, it was just two different visions of Singapore being advanced by two Singaporeans.
Yep.
And one of them did 23 years in solitary confinement over it.
Yep. That's what it came down to. And he was still a prisoner, but they created the trappings of him not being a prisoner. He lived on, again, because in 1989 when he moved there, it was kind of in between eras of Sentosa. Nobody else was living there, but there were guard shacks and things for the construction projects, I believe, and just kind of protecting the dormant properties. And so he was forced to pay rent to live in a guard shack, and to buy his own groceries, so that they could say he wasn't a prisoner. He's doing his own grocery shopping and pays his own rent,
and can walk around.
He could do some walking around. Things gradually eased up. I think there were minders making sure he was where he was supposed to be. Eventually, they offered him a job. They said, if you're a civil servant, we can give you a paycheck. And he said, if I'm a civil servant, I become a puppet of a government that I'm a prisoner of. I'm not doing that. I'll find another way to work to pay the rent on my guard shack. And he became a freelance translator. I think people were sending him manuscripts, and he translated manuscripts on the island in his little guard shack.
It seems like an improvement.
Yeah. Gradually, another reason is because of his failing health, he had to have radical prostate surgery, and I think it was just not a good look for them to, that he was getting sickly. And, this was an opposition leader that they had kind of crushed beneath their will. And they wanted to put a, kind of a happy ending on it if they could. And so they gradually loosened things up. Like I said, when I was living there in 92 to 94, it was kind of an urban legend everybody talked about, that there was this guy that lived in Sentosa. But nobody really knew that he was some kind of, political dissident and hero to some. It was just kind of like, this guy gets to live in an amusement park. How crazy.
Wait, really? So he was not, because the government controlled the media, there wouldn't have been any hagiography around him except among intellectuals of his era?
In certain circles, I imagine, but American teenagers, no, I can say that. We did not know or possibly even care who he was.
And he was only in his mid-50s at this point. So he's in terrible health because of his years in prison, but he's still, he's more or less our age or my age.
Yeah. And gradually they loosened things up. He could go into the city subject to curfews. He could visit his parents. And then eventually, there was no point in even forcing him to live in Sentosa anymore. He was given he received a grant from the Hamburg Foundation to come to Germany and have a fellowship there that was specifically for politically persecuted people. And then, when he got back from Germany, they were like, never mind, you can just live your life now. I think there were some strings attached that he wasn't supposed to go back to being a firebrand of, political dissent. But, he was able to, finish his doctorate and move in with his ailing parents and take care of them and, eventually live a fairly normal life. And I think, started going to Malaysia and speaking to large audiences about his story. And was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015. So he was a Nobel Peace Prize nominee at a certain point for, the stand that he took and his principles that had kind of taken him on a very unique life path.
During that period where he was originally released and living in captivity and more or less not exactly a public figure in Singapore, was he a public figure in the international community of people that were celebrating Leonard Peltier and Nelson Mandela? Did he rank among those people in the kind of like a global resistance, but not global resistance like the IRA and the PLO, but global resistance in this kind of humanitarian world of conscientious objectors?
Yeah, but not in the same way as some, because it's hard to portray Singapore as a villain unless you see the insidious problems that Singapore is very good at spackling over, you know?
Right.
Like, it's easy to say, well, South Africa is a straight up dystopia. Nelson Mandela is fighting that. Singapore is full of people doing great. And to say this guy is fighting to bring Singapore down, it doesn't work the same way. But for people that really care about human rights and freedoms, yeah, he was one of those people that was on all those lists. Like I said, you know, the big rise of Amnesty International, he was one of their poster boys. His narrative was a little bit harder to sell, I think.
Right.
But
because it wasn't about racism, it wasn't about it's not even like a situation in Saudi Arabia where it's authoritarian to the point that people are disappearing and there aren't really civil rights.
But again, they are, right? That's the funny thing about Singapore is that like a lot of terrible things are happening there, but when everybody's winning, it's easy to kind of, and again, I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia got away with this in a comparable way for a long time, right? It's easy to say it can't be that bad because look how great a lot of them are doing.
Sure, look how many Lamborghinis there are with license plates with very low numbers
right.
that cost a surprising amount of money. Singapore sounds like it's got a very similar license plate based economy.
It does, a license plate based economy. But I mean, there's only a certain amount of road in Singapore. I don't think the KSA has the same argument that they have to limit the number of cars on the road or else it's all gridlock all the time because every square foot of asphalt has a car on it.
So in your, having done this research, like, where do your sympathies lie? Is this just a historical anomaly? Is this just a kind of strange obsession of one person who, people dedicate their lives to stranger things than this, and being motivated by a persecution complex is fairly common motivation, actually.
Yeah.
But do you think that his lifelong protest produced results, if not in Singapore, then internationally? I mean, nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize surely means that he inspired some kind of sympathetic reaction.
Yeah, I think so. I initially had the idea for this episode because of the urban legend that I remembered from living in Singapore in the 90s. And I was like, oh, this is fun. I can like have a conversation with John about Michael Fay. And then we talk about how weird Singapore is. And then we talk about there's this guy. And I was like, well, I'll look it up. Who's this guy?
You saw the whole episode laid out before you.
Right. But it wasn't until I looked up who the guy was, I was like, oh, this is an actual guy. Like, it's not just a random, because people get arrested in Singapore all the time. It wasn't an underground gum dealer or somebody that tried to sneak marijuana in from Malaysia. Like, this was one of the most important political figures in Singaporean history. And I'd never heard of him, except for he was the guy who was exiled to a water slide park.
And who are his inheritors, if any? I mean, does he have now people who have taken up his cause?
Yeah, I think there's been growing tolerance. Again, I think just by erosion and just by will of force and the decreasing singular vision of Lee Kuan Yew over time, there is actual multiple political voices in Singapore now. And I think that that's a result of, long, hard effort from people like Chia Tai Po to kind of create a situation where more than one political voice can be tolerated there. Lee Kuan Yew died a few years ago, and his son is a political power in Singapore. But and again, the dominance of the Chinese majority is still an issue there. There's racism issues. There's civil rights issues of all kinds there. But people, I think, are talking about those issues now more than ever before.
But there's a prime minister. There's not. His son didn't inherit his job.
No, it was a gradual transition where after he'd been the prime minister for roughly 30 years, he handed the prime minister position to his hand-chosen successor, Goh Chok Tong, and became what was called, he created a new position for himself, the senior minister. And after 10 years of that, then he became the ministerial advisor or something.
Sure, this is what Castro did for a long time, right?
Yeah, so that's why it's 50 years as control, even though he was only the prime minister for 30 of those years. But it's interesting, he published a memoir. I think this might be a good way to put a pin in the overall story. Lee Kuan Yew's memoir talks about Chia Tai Po in an interesting way.
Wow.
He says, one communist cadre held out after more than 20 years in detention, a believer who refused to give up even after communism collapsed worldwide, Chia Tai Po. He was a determined man with stubborn, if misguided convictions. Although a member of the Malayan Communist Party, he strenuously denied having any links with or sympathy for communism in spite of his membership being confirmed to our Internal Security Department by several MCP members, 2 of whom he directly reported to. He continued to deny communist links, playing on human rights sentiments of the Western media. His detention, in spite of Western media pressure, served to discourage other communist cadres from reactivating their cause under cover of exercising their democratic rights. They were formidable opponents. We had to be as resolute and unyielding in this contest of wills. And so depending on how you look at things, I mean, I saw people posting this quote online in support of Lee Kuan Yew, but when I read that quote, Lee Kuan Yew doesn't sound great.
No, well, and it's quite an epitaph, or like he is ceding some moral authority to him.
Yeah, and even saying that like we had to keep him in prison all through the 80s because we were worried if we let him out in the 80s, at which point, you know, the People's Action Party had been in power more than 2 decades. Immediately communist overthrow fomented, right? Like that's what he's saying, and it doesn't really hold water from my point of view. It's a little bit of a bummer that that's his statement in his memoir of his take on why it was the right thing to do to keep Chia Tai Po in prison. Chia Tai Po's perspective, just to give the other side of it, the quote from him that people go back to is, when let out of prison, he said at 57, "Of course, the best part of my life is gone. That goes without saying. But if I had those years to live over, I wouldn't do anything differently. I wouldn't have signed the confession they drew up that I was a communist because I never was and I never advocated violence." Again, he still held to those 2 things that he would never confess to. And he said, the best of my life is gone, but I took a stand on these 2 things and it was the right thing to do. Right.
Wow. I'm talking to my teenager a lot about personal ethics. And, you know, part of it is this education that teenagers who live in a secular world they don't get. It doesn't seem like a common enough conversation, although it is present in our daily life all the time. The question of, if you are not governed by an ideology, then what governs you, if not your personal code, a personal ethic that you put together out of your education and out of your inner convictions? And like, how does a secular person live a moral life? Why would a secular person live a moral life? It's an argument that people that live according to codes and ideologies often advance. You aren't living according to a code, so what keeps you from just being an anarchist?
Right.
And living according to an inner code is complicated. You have to address it constantly. You have to quiz yourself and eventually adhere to a code where you can't just refer to unseen powers or unquestioned authority.
Oh yeah. I mean, being a person driven by Christian guilt and other, things of a very belief-focused upbringing. I respect secular humanists because they're doing it the hard way. Like, good for them to like make it yourself. And when it comes to today's teenagers, I think they are doing that. It's just sad that they call the modeling of their own moral code and their own moral compass, they call it vibes, which is it's unfortunate, but I mean that's their moral compass. It's the vibes, man.
I mean, vibes, like, right on. But the question of whether or not you're prepared to do 20 years in solitary confinement over vibes, like, you see it so often online where people like make a stand, and then it's like, well, we're taking your Cheetos away, and they're like, whoa.
Hang on.
And now this, the stand, sure. And I don't mean to suggest that people in our era are any quicker to compromise their integrity for a Cheeto than people at any time. But you do, I ask myself all the time, and I think it's very common, and I think it's apropos now to say in a world where mores and social convention and handshake deals are now what used to, the gentleman's agreement that for 200 years made America roll, as those institutions fall apart, where do you make your stand, and how much suffering are you willing to endure on behalf of conviction and integrity? Who are our role models?
I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm as soft as any of them. I'll roll over on a dime. Like, you don't even have to kind of threaten me too hard before I'll start apologizing. It's just my nature. And again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the quality of this episode, for my lackluster performance to the guests, and the whole rest of it.
No. You don't let your Christian guilt get involved here. I think you've done a smashing job. And it isn't every episode, although I know you have experience of some episodes do leave us on a note of reflection. Mm-hmm. They don't all end on, a pirouette and a pun. Especially, God, now that Ken's not here, the number of puns has just fallen right to the floor.
I thought I'd be able to bring it, but I guess when I'm too into the subject matter, I forget. How important those are to the formula.
You had one. But no, I really do feel like, although we're living in an era where a lot of people are quick to avow that they are cowards,
myself included,
we also are not living in an era where a lot of people have actually been pushed to the limit.
Right.
And there is this kind of casual cowardice of like, okay, whatever, like oh, there's some controversy and I said something and everybody's mad. Okay, whatever. I recant and just leave me alone. But if you were pushed, if you were really sat down at a table and pushed, maybe there's more backbone to a lot of us than we would give ourselves credit.
I think that's probably true. I think, if it got very, very serious, I think a lot of people would take a stand. I'm not necessarily hoping that things continue to get worse to the point where we're starting to see a lot of that happening. But we may be on our way to a place where a lot of people are pushed to their limit and decide to stand up and do something about it.
And get exiled to a water park.
You can only hope.
Well, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I love talking to you, and I really hope that as more kooky, crazy ideas come into your head, that you'll join me again. And I feel like this story absolutely deserves inclusion in the great corpus of the omnibus.
Yeah, if the futurelings feel like I'm a reasonable simulacrum of my superior sibling, if everyone says they don't want any more of me, I will happily return to Ken's shadow where I belong. But if called upon, I'm happy to help out because I love the Omnibus Project and I think it's worthwhile. And it's been very exciting to be given the opportunity to participate and be entered in the record for future generations.
There's always going to be a vocal minority, I think a very small minority that are like, enough Jennings content. And there's always going to be people that are like, no more lawyers.
Oh, yeah,
but
well.
I think we got right here today a Jennings and a lawyer. You know, Ken is the only Jennings male that isn't a lawyer, right?
More or less, yeah. I wouldn't necessarily recommend having all of the Jennings lawyers on the show. I think you picked the right one for this particular invitation.
Are you saying if your dad steps forward and has a story that he's like, the government in Squim is making it hard to
He might listen to this, so I'm going to go on the record and say he would be an amazing guest.
Great, thank you. Okay, Nathan. Well, we'll see you again. We'll see you again soon, regardless of what the vocal minority calls for.
Do you need me to help with the outro? Do you need me to do the goods and cheese and the rest of it?
Do you have it memorized?
No, I don't. In our era, we were on social media, blah blah blah.
Yeah, you can do that part.
I can't do the whole thing.
But what about the other one? Futurelings from our vantage point. Can you do that one?
Well, do I have to admit that I thought it was better before you added the extra part?
The goods and cheese?
Yeah, I like the original version.
All right.
I told Ken that, and he said he was never going to pass that feedback on to
you. Can you remember? I mean, I can take the goods and cheese part out. Can you remember the speech?
Futurelings. No.
From our vantage point in your distant past.
From our vantage point in your distant past.
We hope and pray. The catastrophe we fear.
The grammar of this part is also a little bit funny, right?
Well, Ken wrote it, and he says it differently than I do every time.
Does he?
He always has his tenses kind of stacked up in a different way. I'm like, we're talking to the future from the past. He does it sometimes in present tense.
Yeah.
It
seems like it should be kind of like a future past where you say should not have happened or will not have happened or something, right?
From our vantage point in your distant past, we hope and pray, present tense, that the catastrophe we fear,
because we're fearing it now,
may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word.
Yeah.
And Ken, his wording is slightly different than mine.
Yeah, he says, I think that's the better way, the way that you're saying it now. But the way that Ken says it, I'm always like, oh, the cases are not lining up grammatically, especially when it's one long nested sentence like that.
The thing is, he's never going to listen to this episode. That's one thing we both know. And so we could spend another 20 minutes nitpicking your brother. And
oh man, I'm so glad he's not on the show anymore.
Yeah. Although he may still read the Facebook comments. I know that was part of his favorite part of his week. Yeah. Okay, Nathan, I'll let you go, and we will talk again soon. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that concludes Exiled to Sentosa. Entry 438.LU2319. Certificate number 41799 in the omnibus. Futurelings, I hate social media, and I'm sure you do too. We disavow it, and yet we contribute to it here at the Omnibus Project. Anywhere you put in Omnibus Project, you will find we are there beavering away. Fans of the show can be found anywhere that Futurelings congregate. Just type in the sobriquet Futurelings, and they will be throughout the internet. You can email us, and we will receive your email at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can send us physical mail to The Omnibus Project, 609 Southwest 150th Street, number 48084. Burien, Washington, 98166-9998. Our show is listener supported at patreon.com/omnibusproject. Thank you for helping us continue to keep the show on the air. We have a lot of special stuff behind the paywall at Patreon, including outtakes of the shows, show notes, photographs of ephemera, contributions from our co-hosts, supporting documentation, and a large backlog of addenda shows featuring former co-host Ken Jennings, and merch items for different tiers. Lots and lots of exclusive content there. So go to patreon.com/omnibusproject and join the community. Future links from our vantage point in your distant past. We have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. If the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we wish you many goods and cheese and hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.